The Hammond police station was quiet. Lawrence, the officer on duty, was lazily going through his paperwork when the phone rang. He answered it in his usual monotone, expecting another complaint about noisy neighbors. However, the caller sounded agitated, refusing to identify himself. "Look, I don't want any trouble." The husky voice sounded wary. "Just tell them there's something wrong on Willow Street at number 28. There's been a smell coming from there for days now. Odor. You know what I mean? A strange, bad odor." Lawrence straightened up and reached for his notebook. "Can you be more specific about what kind of odor?" "Like something tainted," the voice answered after a pause. "I work for the utility company, checking meters. I don't want any trouble, but you should check this house." The line cut off before Lawrence could ask any more questions. He looked thoughtfully at the recorded address and sighed. There were frequent calls to that neighborhood, ranging from fights to suspicious activity. The officer relayed the information to the detective on duty. 2 hours later, Detective Nyame Abade parked his shabby squad car outside an unassuming one-story house on Willow Street. The neighborhood was typical of the poorer part of Hammond: shabby facades, unkept yards, old cars on the curb. House number 28 didn't stand out from the neighboring buildings. Faded blue paint, a small porch, curtained windows. Nyame got out of the car, adjusted the holster under his jacket, and looked around. The 45-year-old detective with 20 years of experience knew all too well what anonymous calls about strange odors could mean. He'd seen a lot of deaths in his career, and some of them had been discovered precisely because of vigilant neighbors complaining about the smell. Before approaching the house, the detective paused, sniffing. But the summer breeze carried only the smells of fried food from the neighboring house and exhaust from the nearby street. Abad walked up to the porch and knocked decisively. The door did not open immediately. First he heard shuffling footsteps, then fiddling with the lock. At last, a woman in her 50s appeared in the doorway, thin, with dark skin and close-cropped hair touched with gray. Her eyes were wary. "Mrs. Malik?" the detective asked, showing his badge. "I'm Detective Nyame Abade, Hammond Police Department. We received a report of a possible problem in your house." The woman frowned, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "What kind of problem?" "We're fine. Someone reported a strange odor coming from your house. Did you notice anything unusual?" "An odor?" Sheba Malik flinched slightly but then shook her head. "No, nothing like that. Maybe it's the garbage cans in the backyard. Garbage pickup was delayed this week." Abade nodded, but something about the woman's demeanor seemed odd to him. Her gaze kept drifting away, her fingers nervously rubbing the edge of her t-shirt. "Can I come in and have a look around?" "Just a formality," he added, seeing her hesitation. "Yay, I haven't cleaned up." Sheba shifted from foot to foot. "In fact, I was about to leave for work." "It'll only take a few minutes, ma'am. Who else lives with you? Is your husband at home?" At the mention of her husband, Sheba visibly tensed. "No, Kieran's not here. He's away with relatives in Chicago for a few days. Family business." "When did he leave?" 3 days ago," she answered too quickly. "Look, detective, I'm really late. Why don't you come back later?" Abade continued gently, but insistently. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Malik, but it's better to deal with it now. If there is no problem, I will leave in a minute." Reluctantly, Sheba stepped aside, allowing the detective to enter inside. The house was clean, but the furnishings spoke of tight financial circumstances. Old furniture, shabby linoleum, cheap curtains. Abede looked around, taking a sniff. The house smelled of cleaning products, perhaps too strong, as if it had been thoroughly cleaned recently. "You said your husband left 3 days ago?" the detective asked, walking further into the living room. "How long was he gone?" "I don't know exactly." Sheba shrugged, following at his heels. "Maybe a week, maybe more. Depends on how things go with his cousin." The detective nodded, noting the lack of photographs in the room. "What does your husband do, Mrs. Malik?" "He works in a warehouse, a loader. the woman said quietly, not meeting his gaze. And you? Laundry. I should be there in half an hour. Abaid went into the kitchen. There was one cup on the table and one plate in the sink. He opened the refrigerator and saw fresh produce, milk, eggs, a package of fresh meat. Have you been shopping recently? He asked. Yesterday. Sheba nodded. I always go to the store on Tuesdays. That's a lot of food for one person, the detective remarked. Yeah, I'm used to cooking for two, she replied quickly. It's hard to readjust. The detective walked slowly further down the hall. Is this your bedroom? He pointed to an ajar door. Yes, but it's a mess. Abaid looked inside anyway. The double bed was neatly made. There was an alarm clock and a book on one nightstand. The other was empty. There was a dresser in the corner and a closed closet next to it. May I? The detective asked, pointing to the closet. Sheba turned visibly pale. What do you need that for? I told you my husband was away. Just a simple check, ma'am. Without waiting for permission, Abade opened the closet doors. Inside hung men's shirts, pants, a few jackets, all in their places, with no sign that anyone had packed for the trip. Your husband had gone without clothes for a week? He's got stuff at his brother's. Sheba was wringing her hands. Look, detective, I don't know what's going on. You come in for some odor, and now you're questioning me about my husband? Just gathering information, Mrs. Malik, Abade replied calmly. Do you mind if I look around the rest of the house? Yeah. She hesitated, then nodded sharply. All right. Just quickly, please. I have to go. The detective looked around the bathroom. Clean, with a single toothbrush in the glass. Then a small guest bedroom that served as a closet. He noticed a door at the end of the hallway. Is that the basement? Yes, but there's nothing interesting in there, Sheba answered too quickly. Just old stuff, my husband's tools. I hardly ever go down there. Still, I'd like to take a look. It's locked, she said. Kieran has the key. Abade looked at the woman carefully. Her forehead was sweating despite the air conditioner running. All right, Mrs. Malik, that's enough for today. Thank you for your cooperation. May I have your husband's cell phone number? I'd like to ask him a few questions. He forgot his cell phone. Sheba looked away. That's why I can't reach him. But he should be back soon. I see. The detective nodded. In that case, I'll be back. Probably with a search warrant. A search warrant? Her eyes widened with fear. But why? Standard procedure when there is suspicion. Abad pulled out a business card. If your husband returns early, please ask him to contact me. Or if you remember anything important. As he left the house, the detective noticed a neighbor trimming a hedge. A middle-aged man with a sturdy build was looking curiously at the police car. Good afternoon, Abaid addressed him, showing his badge. Detective Nayame Abad. Can I ask you a couple of questions? The man put aside the garden shears and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Jabari Oyewole, he introduced himself. Did something happen at Maliki's? Just a routine check. Do you know the Malik family well? Good enough for neighbors. Jabari shrugged. We say hello, sometimes help each other out with little things. We've lived next door to each other for about 8 years. When was the last time you saw Mr. Malik? Jabari thought for a moment. The day before yesterday, I think. Yes, the night before last. He was coming home from work, and we had a few words about the baseball game. Are you sure it was the night before yesterday? Abade asked. Positive. I was just coming back from my shift at the supermarket, and it was about 9 o'clock at night. Abade made a note in his notebook. This fact contradicted Sheba's statement that her husband had left 3 days ago. How did he look? Did you notice anything unusual in his behavior? No, just a normal Kieran, Jabari shrugged. Maybe a little tired, said he had a headache after his shift. You know how it is in the warehouse in the summer. The heat is unbearable. Did he mention going to Chicago to see relatives? The neighbor raised his eyebrows in surprise. No, nothing like that. We only talked about the match. The detective nodded, making another note. And Mrs. Malik? Have you noticed anything unusual in her behavior in recent days? Jabari thought for a moment. Yes, actually. She's been a little, jumpy? Yesterday, I offered to help her with heavy bags from the store, and she almost jumped away from me. Also, there's a loud TV coming from their house at night. I'd never heard that before. Kieran had always complained about the noise. Interesting. Abade stretched out. Anything else? Strange smells, maybe? Odors? Jabari sniffed. No, nothing like that. Although, Sheba's been burning a lot of incense the last 2 days. She says it's for meditation, but I've never noticed it before. The detective thanked his neighbor and went back to the car. Sitting behind the wheel, he reviewed his notes. 2 apparent contradictions. Sheba claims her husband left 3 days ago, but the neighbor saw him the day before yesterday. All the man's clothes are hanging in the closet, even though he's supposedly been gone for a week or longer. Plus the locked basement, the woman's nervousness and fresh groceries, as if she expects her husband to return soon or pretends he is still at home. Abade started the car and radioed the station. I need information on Kieran Malik, he said. See if his car has been out of town in the last 3 days, and run his cell phone, recent calls, location. By the end of the day, the detective was sitting in his office, reviewing the data. Kieran Malik's silver sedan didn't register on the cameras on the way out of town. The last call from his phone had been made 5 days ago, after which the device had not signaled. Abade tapped his pen on the desk thoughtfully. Something was definitely wrong at the Willow Street house, and he intended to find out what it was. It was an unusually sweltering early morning, even for July Hammond. Detective Niameh Abadi sat in an unremarkable black sedan parked 2 houses down from the Malik's place. On the passenger seat was a file folder, and on his lap was a cooled coffee in a cardboard cup. The surveillance of the house had begun before dawn, when most of the neighborhood was asleep. Abade rubbed his eyes, reddened from lack of sleep. Yesterday's inconsistencies in Sheba Malik's and neighbor Jabari's stories kept him awake. His intuition, honed by years of service, screamed that something was seriously wrong in this house. The reports he'd received the night before only confirmed his suspicions. Kieran's car hadn't left town, and his phone had been silent for 5 days. At 7:30 in the morning, the front door of the Malikov house opened. Abade straightened, watching Sheba step out onto the porch in her laundry worker's uniform. She looked around, almost fearfully, the detective noted, locked the door, and walked briskly toward the bus stop. Abade made a note in his notebook and decided to divide today into 2 fronts. Continue surveillance of the house and simultaneously dig deeper into the Malik family's past. Around 10 in the morning, a shabby cab pulled up outside the Malik's house. A young man in jeans and a brightly colored t-shirt got out of the cab. The detective tensed up, taking pictures with a long lens camera. The man looked to be about 27 years old, tall, with distinctive facial features reminiscent of Kieran Malik from the database photo. The stranger walked briskly to the porch and rang the doorbell several times. When he got no answer, he pulled out his cell phone and called someone, pacing back and forth impatiently. After a few minutes, he tried the doorbell again, then looked out the window, covering his eyes with his palms against the sun. Abade decided to take action. He got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the house like a casual passerby. "Good morning," he called out to the young man. "Are you looking for someone?" The man turned around, looking at the detective appraisingly. "What's it to you?" he asked warily. Abade showed his badge. "Detective Niameh Abad, Hammond Police Department. And you are?" The man visibly tensed. "Tambo Bamadel," he introduced himself reluctantly. "I am Kieran Malik's nephew. I came to visit my uncle, but no one seems to be home." "When was the last time you saw your uncle?" Tambo frowned. About 4 days ago. I went to their house for dinner. What happened? Why are the police interested in my uncle? Just checking, Mr. Bamadel. Have you tried contacting your uncle by phone? Of course. Tambo waved his hand irritably. His phone has been disconnected for days. Aunt Sheba said he lost it. But that's strange. Uncle never leaves his phone alone. And now Auntie is not picking up the phone, even though I know she is at work. Abaid watched the expression on the young man's face carefully. The anxiety in his eyes seemed genuine. Didn't your aunt tell you that Kieran went to Chicago to stay with relatives? Tambo raised his eyebrows in surprise. Chicago? Number. There must be some mistake. Uncle has no relatives in Chicago. All his brothers and sisters live here in Indiana, and he wouldn't go anywhere without telling me. We're close. It was another contradiction that heightened the detective's suspicions. Do you have keys to the house? I used to. Tambo nodded. But Aunt Sheba changed the locks a month ago. Said she'd lost her keys and was worried about security. Interesting, Abade said thoughtfully. Here is my card, Mr. Bamadel. If you hear from your uncle, or if you have any further information, call me. Tambo took the card, examining it with suspicion. You think something happened to my uncle? Just doing my job, the detective replied evasively. Call me if you remember anything. Back in the car, Abade made some calls. His next stop was the Freshness Laundry, where Sheba Malik worked. The small building with rows of washers and dryers was located a few blocks from the Malik's home. It was stuffy inside, the air heavy with the odor of detergents and moisture. Abad approached the counter, where a thin, middle-aged woman was sorting laundry. Good afternoon, he showed his badge. I'm looking for Sheba Malik. The woman pointed to the back of the room where Sheba was folding washed sheets. The detective decided to talk to his co-workers first. How long have you worked with Mrs. Malik? 3 years, said the woman who identified herself as Luda. Sheba's a good person, quiet, hard-working. Have you noticed anything unusual in her behavior in recent days? Luda stopped sorting laundry for a second. Now that you ask, yes, she's been acting strange. She's always twitching, talking to herself. Yesterday I saw her calling someone, but her phone wasn't on. She pretended like she was talking to her husband. She's also started taking double lunches. She says one is for her husband, but then she eats them herself. A second worker, a large man named Bakari, a clean laundry delivery man, joined the conversation. I drove her home the day before yesterday, he said. Sheba talked all the way home about her husband expecting her for dinner, but when I dropped her off, she just sat in the car, didn't want to get out. Said she forgot to buy his favorite sauce. It was late. The stores were closed, but she insisted I take her to a convenience store across town. Abade wrote down his statement and approached Sheba, who seemed oblivious to his presence, mechanically folding laundry. Mrs. Malik, he addressed her. We need to talk. Sheba looked up and her hands froze. A look of fear flashed in her eyes. Detective? What are you doing here? I just have a few more questions. Tambo Bamidele came to your house this morning. He said he was your husband's nephew. Sheba clutched the sheet in her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Tambo? Her voice trembled. What did he want? To visit my uncle. He claims your husband has no relatives in Chicago. He's wrong. Sheba looked away. Kieran doesn't tell Tambo all his business. Mrs. Malik, your neighbor, Mr. Oyewole, said he saw your husband 2 days ago, though you claim he left 3 days ago. Your husband's car has not left town, and his phone has not beeped for 5 days. Would you care to explain these inconsistencies? Sheba lowered her arms, the sheet falling to the floor. She was silent, staring at one point. Mrs. Malik, I'm going to get a search warrant for your house, Abade said firmly. If you have anything to say, now is the time. I have nothing to add, she replied quietly. Kieran will be back soon. It's all right. Back at the station, The detective plunged into the study, into the Malik family's past. Kieran and Sheba's story was a typical picture of working class life in Hammond, a constant struggle with financial difficulties, occasional run-ins with the law over minor things, a few speeding tickets for Kieran, one detention for Sheba for protesting the closing of a local school. The family's financial situation has deteriorated in recent months. The Malik's bank account showed regular withdrawals of large sums of cash, which was uncharacteristic of their usual spending regimen. In Kiaran Abad's medical records, Abad found notes of complaints of headaches and stomach problems over the past 3 months. Another detail caught the detective's attention, a complaint from neighbors from a month ago about a loud scandal at the Malik's home. The patrol officers who arrived on call had picked up signs of a struggle in the living room, but both Kieran and Sheba had denied any problems, insisting they were simply watching a sports match at an elevated volume. By 3 p.m., a judge had signed a search warrant for Malikau's home. Abade gathered a group and headed to Willow Street. They waited for Sheba to return from work, and the detective personally handed her the paperwork. "Mrs. Malik, we have a warrant to search your home. Please stay here with Officer Raja while we go through the procedure." Sheba seemed petrified. She stared blankly at the papers and did not utter a word. Abade nodded to his team, and they proceeded to scrutinize the house, starting with the upper rooms. In the bedroom, they found a note from the bank about a late mortgage payment hidden under the mattress. In the bathroom, they found several packages of strong sleeping pills prescribed in Sheba's name. In the kitchen, a strange powder in a spice container, which the officers carefully seized for laboratory analysis. But the most important thing was in the basement. The door was locked, just as Sheba had said it would be, but one of the officers quickly managed the lock. The stairs to the basement were steep and narrow, the air below stale and heavy. Abade turned on his flashlight and descended slowly, feeling the foul odor, partially masked by the scent of incense, grow stronger with each step. The basement was divided into 2 parts. The first held old things, tools, and boxes of junk. The second part was partitioned off with a makeshift curtain made of old sheets. Abade gingerly pulled back the cloth and froze. On an old mattress lay the body of a man. Kieran Malik was dressed in a clean shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed, his arms folded across his chest. But there was no doubt about it. The man had been dead for days. Candles and incense burned around the mattress, and a small table held a framed photograph of Kieran, a few withered flowers, and a plate of untouched food. "Damn it," one of the officers whispered behind Abade's back. "She had set up some sort of shrine in here." The detective turned to his team. "Call forensics and the coroner, and get Mrs. Malik in here." Sheba was brought in handcuffs. She walked down the steps, showing no surprise or fear at the scene she had discovered. Her gaze was blank, her face emotionless. "Mrs. Malik?" Abade's voice sounded official. "You are under arrest on suspicion of concealing the death and possible murder of Kieran Malik. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Sheba stared through the detective as if unable to hear his words. Her lips moved faintly, saying something silently. "Do you understand your rights, Mrs. Malik?" She blinked and finally looked at Abade. "He's just sleeping," she said quietly. "There's no need to disturb him. Kieran is working the night shift. He needs to rest." There was no hysteria or fear in her voice, just calm conviction. Abade nodded to the officer, who gently led the woman out of the basement. An hour later, Dr. Abeni Okafor, a pathologist who had worked with the Hammond police for 5 years, arrived on the scene. The slender woman with short dreadlocks walked determinedly down to the basement, where forensic experts were already recording all the details of the scene. "What have we got here, Nime?" she asked, pulling on her gloves. "The body of a male, 53 years old, presumably Kieran Malik. His wife pretended he was still alive." Abad replied briefly. Dr. Okafor proceeded with the initial examination. She checked the body temperature, rigor mortis, examined the eyes, mouth, and hands of the deceased. She then took some photographs and tissue samples. Preliminarily, she said, after the examination, death was at least 5 days ago, maybe 5 to 7 days. I'll be more specific after the autopsy. There are no obvious signs of violent death, no gunshot wounds, no signs of strangulation or blunt force trauma. But there is a strange skin tone and an unusual rigor mortis characteristic. I wouldn't rule out poisoning. Poisoning? Abade remembered a strange powder in the kitchen. We need to test the substance we found among the spices immediately. I will take samples of the stomach contents and check for toxins. Abeni nodded. But if the death really happened more than 5 days ago, the body is pretty well preserved. It's cool in here, but still, I wonder if she was trying to slow decomposition in any way. The detective looked around and noticed a small refrigerator in the corner of the basement. Maybe, he said. She works in the laundry room, knows about chemicals. Maybe she used something to preserve the body. Abeni took a few more notes. I'll do a full autopsy today. Toxicology results will be in a few days, but you'll get a preliminary conclusion on cause of death tomorrow morning. Rising from the basement, Abade cast one last glance at the makeshift shrine Sheba had created. What made that woman pretend her husband was still alive? Fear? Madness? Or was she trying to cover up a crime? These questions remained unanswered for now, but the detective was determined to find them. The interrogation room of the Hammond police station was small and uninviting. A table, 2 chairs, a one-way mirror on the wall, nothing extra. Sheba Malik sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead with an unseeing gaze. Detective Niame Abade sat opposite, opening a file folder. "Mrs. Malik," he began calmly, "we need to talk about your husband." Sheba flinched faintly, but remained silent. She was still wearing her laundry uniform, only without her badge. Her hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Do you understand what happened?" The detective continued. "We found Kieran's body in your basement. He'd been dead for days, but you kept pretending he was alive. Why?" "Kieran is just sleeping," she answered firmly without changing her expression. "He's been working hard, tired." Abade sighed and placed the pictures of the scene on the table. "This is not a dream, Mrs. Malik. Your husband is dead. Dr. Okafor is already conducting an autopsy. You do realize it's a crime to cover up a death? Not to mention possible murder." "Murder?" Sheba finally looked at the detective, fear in her eyes. "I didn't kill anyone. Kieran just—" She stopped talking, clenching and unclenching her fists. "Just what?" Abade gently nudged her. "Sheba, I want to help, but to do that I need to know the truth. What happened to Kieran?" I don't know," she mumbled. "Just found him, like this, in bed. He wouldn't wake up. I tried to wake him up, but—" Her voice shook, then suddenly became completely calm. "But he just needed to sleep, after the night shift. I moved him to the basement so it would be quieter. I know he'll wake up soon." Abade noticed these abrupt transitions between realization and denial. He decided to change tactics. "You carried him yourself? The body of a grown man?" Sheba frowned. "Yeah, don't remember. Maybe he went on his own, or maybe I helped." "When did it happen? Does it matter?" She started rocking in her chair. "He's just sleeping. Everyone says he's dead, but I know. He's sound asleep. I make his food. I keep the house clean, like a good wife." "Sheba," the detective leaned toward her. "Do you know your husband was poisoned?" The woman froze, stopped swaying. Her eyes opened wide. "Poisoned?" she whispered. "We found a strange powder among the spices in your kitchen. The lab is testing it now. Did you put something in Kieran's food?" "No!" Sheba showed strong emotion for the first time in the whole interrogation. "I would never. Kieran is my husband. 30 years together. I would never." She stopped and stared into the void. Her eyes lost focus, and her hands fell to her knees. Sheba seemed to sink into a daze of some kind, unresponsive to questions. The detective tried several more approaches, but the woman fell into a catatonic state. The doctor called to the station recommended that she be transferred to the psychiatric ward of the local hospital for observation and treatment. Leaving the interrogation room, Abade made his way to the pathology department. Dr. Abeni Okafor was finishing the autopsy when the detective entered the prosector's room. "Any results yet?" he asked, trying not to look at Kieran's open body. Abeni nodded, removing her bloody gloves. "Preliminary ones. And they are curious. Kieran Malik died of poisoning by a substance I cannot yet identify. It's not standard household poisons, not common medications or known narcotics. The toxin attacked the nervous system and internal organs, especially the liver and kidneys. Judging by the condition of the tissue, the effects were slow and gradual. So he was poisoned over a long period of time? Probably, yes. Weeks, maybe months. But the last dose was much higher and fatal. I've sent samples to a specialized lab in Indianapolis. We should have the results in 2 or 3 days, but I can say with certainty, it's an exotic toxin, not easily obtained or manufactured." Abade frowned. "Sheba works in the laundry. Could she have access to such substances? I doubt it. That would require specialized knowledge of chemistry or pharmaceuticals, access to a lab. It's not the kind of poison you can just buy on the black market or make with household chemicals." "Interesting," said the detective. "We found the powder in the kitchen. The lab has already analyzed it. Could it be poison? It's possible. If it's the same toxin, it could have been added to the food. I found leftovers in the deceased's stomach. Looks like dinner. Meat, vegetables, spices. Poisoning through the digestive system is the most likely scenario." Abade thanked the pathologist and went back to the station. He needed a new lead, and it didn't take long. The lab tech called with preliminary results from the powder found in Malikow's kitchen. "Detective, it's some kind of modified plant alkaloid, a very rare and complex compound. We're still analyzing it, but it's a specialized toxin. You can't make one of these at home." That changed the whole picture. Sheba could hardly have had access to such a rare poison, let alone the knowledge to make it. Abade began to look at the case file from a new perspective. He was reminded of a young nephew who had come to the Maliki home, Tambo Bamidele. The detective requested data on the young man. The information turned out to be interesting. 27-year-old Tambo had a bachelor's degree in chemistry, but worked for a food delivery service. 2 years ago, he had been arrested on suspicion of manufacturing synthetic drugs, but the case had been closed due to lack of evidence. Abade contacted one of the Malik's neighbors, an elderly woman named Chioma, who was a long-time resident of Willow Street. "Yes, I know the Malik family well," she confirmed over the phone. "The nephew? Sure, he's been there a lot, especially in the last few months. He used to come over and cook for them, especially Kieran. Said his aunt couldn't cook spicy food like his uncle. Nice-looking boy, always polite. Helped Kieran with his car repairs. This was important information. Tambo had regular access to the house and personally prepared food for his uncle. The possibility of poisoning was becoming more and more real. Further investigation led Abad to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Hammond. Surveillance installed on Tambo revealed that the young man visited the place regularly, spending hours at a time, often at night. After obtaining a warrant, police broke into the warehouse and found a small but well-equipped laboratory. Experts confirmed that various synthetic substances, including rare toxins, were being manufactured there. Tambo was arrested in his apartment. To the surprise of the police, he showed little resistance, as if he had been expecting them. At the station, the young man remained silent for a long time, refusing to speak without a lawyer. But after several hours of waiting, he suddenly asked to see Detective Abad alone. "How is she?" was the first thing he asked when the detective sat down across from him. "Auntie Sheba, is she okay?" "Physically, yes," Abade replied. But psychologically, she is in the hospital under the care of doctors. Tambo sighed and lowered his head. I knew she couldn't take it. For too long, she tried to pretend everything was normal. She was always too soft. Did you know your uncle was poisoned, Tambo? The young man looked up. There was no surprise in his eyes. I know. I did it. Abade did not expect a direct confession. He switched on the tape recorder and read the suspect his rights. Why did you kill your uncle, Tambo? I had no choice, the young man answered calmly. He found out about my business, about the laboratory. He found samples in my bag when I was visiting them. My uncle was always a man of principle. Said he'd give me a week to shut it down and turn myself in to the police, or he'd report the lab himself. And instead of listening, you decided to kill him? You don't understand, Detective. Tambo shook his head. I owed some serious people a lot of money. If I shut down the lab, I'd be killed. My uncle refused to listen. He thought I was just having fun with drugs. But my business is rare chemical compounds for pharmaceutical research. Poisons are just a byproduct. I sell them to whoever I need to pay off my debts. And Kieran became one of your test subjects? Tambo shuddered. No. I loved my uncle. I just didn't have a choice. I used a slow-acting toxin, added to his food in small doses for weeks. He complained of headaches, weakness, thought it was work. And then that night, I added the last dose. He fell asleep and never woke up again. It was, merciful. Merciful? Abade could barely contain his anger. You poisoned the man who raised you because he wanted you to do the right thing? You don't understand, Tambo repeated. Auntie Sheba is not to blame. She found him dead and called me in a panic. I came and told her that we must cover up the death of my uncle, or the police will investigate and come after me. And if they did, they'd implicate her as an accomplice. I convinced her we needed to buy time so I could get rid of all the evidence in the lab. And she agreed? Not right away. Tambo lowered his gaze. First, she wanted to call the police. Then I scared her. I told her that the people I owed didn't care who they killed. Me, her, the neighborhood kids, that they'd find and kill everyone I knew. She believed me, and agreed to pretend my uncle was still alive until I solved the problem. But instead of solving the problems, you kept producing in the lab. Yeah, I thought a couple more weeks I'd pay off my debts, leave the country. Aunt Sheba could have reported my uncle dead, said she'd just found him. No one would have known. But then you showed up with your questions. Abade shook his head, feeling a mixture of disgust and pity for the young man who had so easily sacrificed the life of his own kinsman. Do you know what is most ironic, Tambo? Your aunt still refuses to acknowledge her husband's death. She's so traumatized by your threats and her own actions that her sanity has failed. She's created an alternate reality where Kieran just sleeps. Don't you think you've ruined more lives than one? Tambo didn't answer, looking down at the table. I'll write down your confession and you'll sign it, the detective continued. Then we'll transport you to the county jail to await trial. You'll be charged with first-degree murder, manufacture of a controlled substance, intimidation of a witness, and possibly several other charges when we finish analyzing the contents of your lab. And Aunt Sheba? Tambo asked quietly. What will happen to her? She will remain in the hospital until the doctors deem it possible to discharge her. Given your confession and her mental state, there will probably be no charges against her. She's a victim, Tambo. Your victim, just like your uncle. Tambo put his head in his hands and his shoulders shook. A few days after Tambo's arrest, Abad visited Sheba in the hospital. The psychiatrists had begun intensive therapy, and the woman was gradually coming back to reality, though the process promised to be a long one. When the detective entered her room, she was sitting by the window, looking out over the hospital garden. Mrs. Malik, he called softly. How are you feeling? Sheba turned around slowly. There was more realization in her eyes than during the interrogation. Detective Abade. She nodded weakly. Dr. Mirza said you arrested Tambo. Yes, he confessed to everything. He told me how he poisoned your husband and how he forced you to cover up his death. Sheba was silent for a long time, then tears rolled down her cheeks. I should have been stronger, she whispered. I should have gone to the police right away. But I was so afraid. Tambo told horror stories about the people he worked for. And then it was easier to pretend Karen was still alive, just sleeping, just working late, just gone to visit relatives. It's not your fault, Sheba, Abade said softly. Tambo manipulated you, used your fear and grief. But I could have saved Kieran, her voice trembled. I noticed he was getting worse every time Tambo cooked for us. But Kieran was so happy to see his nephew, considered him almost a son. I didn't want to ruin that bond with my suspicions. You couldn't know for sure, and now it is important that you focus on your own recovery. Sheba nodded, wiping away her tears. What will happen to Tambo? He's going to trial. All things considered, he faces life in prison without parole. He was a good boy once, Sheba said quietly. Before he got involved with a bad crowd in college, Kieran had been so proud of him when he got his degree. Her voice trembled again. Now I'm going to bury my husband and lose my nephew forever. The detective put his hand on the woman's shoulder in a show of support. The Malik family's story was a tragedy born of fear, greed, and weakness of character. Though justice would be served, nothing would bring Sheba back to her former life. A week later, on a gray, rainy day, Abade watched a police van take Tambo Bamidel to the county jail. The young man, who could have built a successful career as a chemist, would now spend the rest of his life behind bars. The real killer was arrested, and the mystery of the Willow Street house was solved. But it didn't bring the detective the usual satisfaction of a completed case. Too many lives had been ruined because of one bad decision.